Hello React Native developers, I hope you are well. William here, recording from beautiful Zurich, Switzerland. Someone tagged me to this tweet asking, can it be done in React Native? And what is drawing us in is such an example are the beautiful 3D transformations, but what will keep us hooked is the delicate orchestration between transitions, gestures, and animations. Let's have a look. This example immediately caught my attention for three reasons. First, it seems to be coming from the SwiftUI course of Meng2, and I love everything Meng2 is doing. Secondly, it overall looks and feels great, just a great gesture and animation. Thirdly, there seems to be some interesting challenging points in implementing such an example. Let's talk about them. How would we do this in React Native? So we have the background view with the show menu button that toggles the opening and closing of the drawer. The state can be either a React state, true, false if the drawer is open, or an animation value 0 or 1 if the drawer is closed or open. This depends on whether you need the opened value present in the JavaScript state or thread, or if you don't need to have this value available in the JavaScript thread. Whether it's a React state or an animation value that contains a state, we can easily attach a transition to it, which we will use to do the 3D transformation on the view. So we rotate on the y-axis to, let's say, 30 degrees, 45 degrees. We transform the origin of rotation, which is originally at the center of the view. We translate it to the right side of the view, so we know how to do these transform origins in React Native. And we have some border radius animation that goes from 0 to some value, 10, 20 pixels. And also we have some opacity that changes. So we have a mask over the view, which is a gray mask, and it has an opacity value of 0 when the drawer is closed. This part is fairly trivial. Then once the drawer is open, we use the transition value of the drawer opening to slide the drawer to its presenting position, the one when you see it, but we only want to use this transition value when the drawer is opening. When dragging the cards, we want the gesture obviously to take over. We drag the card around, we release the gesture, and then we need to calculate where we need to snap the card. Do we snap it back to the 0 position, the one you see here, or we swipe it to the right, and this will trigger the closing of the drawer. So this is when things get a little bit complex, but it's a pattern we've used in previous videos. I'm thinking about, for instance, the thing, Can It Be Done in React Native episode where we implemented a scroll view from scratch, and it's a very common pattern. You have a gesture and animation, or the Tinder example. So you drag a thing around, and then you release it, you trigger an animation. Once the gesture and the animation are over, you want to execute a side effect. So in the case of Tinder, for instance, it's I swiped left or right. Here it's should I close the menu? And this side effect, you want to execute it only once. So we know the gesture is over when the state of the gesture is state.end. We know the animation is over when the clock that we assign to the animation has stopped. And we need a safeguard value that once these, so gesture and animation are stopped, I apply the side effect. I use a safeguard value to say the side effect is done. Don't execute it twice, because the state, gesture is over, animation is over, is going to be true for every frame. But we need some special condition to say, okay, the side effect related to the end of the gesture and animation is over. And one way you could do it is to set the state of the gesture back to undetermined, which is its original state. And that would work well, but I don't like messing up. I don't find it clean, because you're not supposed to, the state should only be, in my opinion, written by the gesture handler, and so you shouldn't mess around with the gesture state. So yeah, actually a common pattern with gestures and animations that we need to get right in order for such example to work well And finally, if we are moving the gesture around, we release, it's animating, and while it's animating, we can still interrupt the gesture, so move the card again. When we begin the gesture, we need to stop the clock, so stopping the current animation and have the gesture taking over. So this will make the card and the animation nicely interruptible, which is always something we want to do when building gestures and animations. Guys, before we get started, one thing, if you're interested to learn the fundamental of gestures and animations in React Native, I recommend you check out my online course at startreactnative.dev. My goal with this course is to provide you with all the tools and knowledge necessary in order to build incredible user experiences that will run at 60 FPS, even on low-grade Android devices. While following this curriculum, the examples we tackle in the Can It Be Done in React Native series should feel absolutely trivial. I'm really trying to teach you the fundamental recipes that I use behind the scene so you can use them in turn to build incredible user experiences in React Native. So if you're interested to learn the fundamentals, I hope you check it out at startreactnative.dev. Alright guys, let's get started. So here I have a boilerplate project which you can download from the video description in case you want to follow along with this example. And I have my view with a state, is the drawer open or not, and I can press it to open it. There's no animations nor gestures, so I can open it, close it. So I have two views, the screen view, which is the one you see here, with the button. I looked at the open Boolean value to set some transformations. So that's the one I'm setting here. So I'm adding some border radius, some rotation on the y-axis, and I'm translating the axis of rotation to be on the right edge of the screen. So originally it's it's at the center of the view, so I'm translating by half of the width of the view, translating back once the rotation is done. This is how you apply these transform origins in React Native. I really like the transform API in React Native. It's much simpler than, doing matrix transformations, I find, and it's I don't know, I find it to be a really good API to use. And I have the profile view, which you see here, which I simply hidden on the left side when it's closed and back to original position. So when it's open, max is 0, and if not, we translate here to the left side. Here the left side translation depends on how much we're gonna rotate the card. So the first thing I'm gonna do here is, I don't need to have open in the JavaScript thread. I'm gonna use an animation value for everything. So I'm gonna create a new animation value called open, and default is it's gonna be 0 or 1. And so here, if we press the screen, we set open to 1. And here, if we close the screen, I mean, we're not gonna use this one at the end, but I can still do it. And we're gonna attach a transition to this value, which we're gonna use for the animation. So I'm gonna create a transition value, and we have a with transition from Redash that we can attach to the open animation value, and we can use it for our animations. So this one, I mean, we're not gonna use this one, but it should be 0. So if you were using a state, you would use transition instead of with transition. So let's go into screen. So open becomes an animated value of 0 or 1, which we actually probably don't need because we only need on press and transition. So we can pass transition. Now we can use transition to interpolate all these animation values. So here we're gonna use binterpolate. I created binterpolate as so binterpolate is like interpolate if the value goes from 0 to 1, so that's a shortcut, so you don't have to write the boilerplate you need to write when using the original interpolate function, it had now non-expected benefit because this is such a simple interpolation and we use it so often. Now we can potentially build a version of binterpolate which is using proc. So that's going to be a small performance boost when using binterpolate versus interpolate in such an example. So here, when the transition is at 0, the rotation is at 0. If not, it's minus alpha. So up here. So let me just. The scale is at 0, it's 1, and at 1 it's 0.9. Opacity would be 0 to 0.5, and border radius would be 0 to 20. Now we need to use animated view. Here and here. Let's have a look. Oh, we probably need to update. So I can remove this one. This one is 0 or 1. I need to update as well the profile component. So open is an animated value of 0, 1. And unpress we're not going to use. Transition we're going to need. So it's animated node of number. Okay. So open, transition. So I can remove this one here. And so what do we have here? We can add, I guess, some translation. The touchable opacity I'm going to remove. We're going to use a pan gesture handler around instead. Okay, so binterpolate. Transition at 0, we're at min. At 1, we're at max. And this becomes an animated view. Okay, let's have a look. Something is... Sorry about that. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, transitions nicely, and now I cannot do anything, and so what we can do is start dragging the card. So I'm gonna add a pan gesture handler, and we have a helper function in Redash to create all the boilerplate we need for the gesture handler, especially since we need to assign it to 2 properties in pan gesture handler component. So pan gesture handler, and I'm gonna create a gesture handler using on gesture event from Redash. We pass the values we need, so we're gonna need the gesture state, translation x, and velocity x. So let me create these animation values quickly. So state, default value is state.undetermined, translation x, and velocity x, which we're gonna use for the spring. Which reminds me, speaking of spring, here I'm using the transition, default transition, which is a timing transition, and I'm gonna use a spring transition to have a nice bouncing effect. It's gonna look very, very cool. Okay, so this one I need to import from gesture handler. And open, okay. Let me just check, you see, now you just have like a nice bouncing effect on the transition, that's cool. So this transition, we only want to use it when opening the... So this is a transition that comes from the menu component. We only want to use it when we're opening the menu. Because when we're not opening the menu, we're either at rest, like this, dragging the gesture, or the gesture is animated, or we finish the gesture and we're animating, snapping to the correct position, or we're closing the drawer, and meaning the view has already been swiped to the right. So this transition, I only want it as the opening transition. So I'm going to rename it to opening transition, and I'm going to create my own transition variable. And I'm going to assign either opening transition, either the gesture transition, or either the animation transition, depending on where it's appropriate. So I'm going to create my own transition variable. And when we open, we assign opening transition to transition. So I'm going to create a use code block. So, and if open is true, so open is 1, and the transition is moving, meaning that diff of opening transition is not equal to 0. Is that? Yes. I want to set opening transition to transition. So I need some imports. This is cool. I really like this example because it's actually like pretty typical, like transition plus gestures plus animations, and having all of them like working well together, the animation being interruptible and so on. I find it to be a classic. So okay, so it's working, it's transitioned. Now we want, if the gesture is active, to assign the gesture transition, so I can drag this around. So if state equals state active, we assign to transition the gesture transition. So gesture transition, we're going to interpolate from translation X. So gesture translation equals interpolate translation X. We go from min to max, and the output range is going to be 0 to 1. That's how we transform the translation X value to a transition value that goes from 0 to 1. 0, 1. So here I am using, speaking again about interpolate and interpolate, here I'm using a very simple interpolation. I'm using interpolate because I am lazy, quote unquote. Here I think it's really worth it it might really be worth it to build the interpolations yourself so that you can use it with a proc function. Because here there is a lot of magic that interpolate does that you don't need for such a simple interpolation, and maybe you shouldn't use it. So let's so we set gesture transition. Let's have a look. Okay, and I can drag the card around. Now we need to do two things. So first we can add more 3D transformations to the card, but also you see if I release, nothing happened. I need to snap to position when releasing the gesture. Let's add some rotation here and some maybe opacity. So opacity, I'm gonna add some rotate Y transformation, which I'm gonna transform the origin of rotation to the left side. So I'm gonna do translate X is minus width divided by 2, and I'm gonna apply my rotation, rotate Y, and translate back. So translate X goes to width divided by 2. So now I need to create opacity and rotate Y. So opacity, rotate Y. Rotate Y goes from at max it's at 0, and at min it's alpha, so things should be 45 degrees, and opacity 0 to 1. Let's have a look. Okay, it's nice bouncing effect. And maybe we need to clamp the value. Translation X. So here I could clamp to min and max plus, so max would be 0 plus some value on the right, because on the demo, which is this padding value that I have here, like to go to 100 pixels. And now if the gesture finishes, let's spring to the snapping position. So we need to calculate the snapping point. So we're going to create snap2, and we have a function in redash to calculate that. So value is going to be x, velocity is going to be velocity. Yes, I need to create intermediary value, so called x, which I can use here and here. So velocity x, the points are min and max, and we want to check if, so we want the snap2 to be either 0 if we swipe to the left, or 1 if we swipe, if it goes back to position. So we check if snap2 is equal to max, which is max is the original position. So that's our snap point. So if we finish the gesture, so state equals state end, we need to assign to transition the value of the animation. Here, if it's we go back to the resting position, we're going to use a spring. We want the spring to be very bouncy, look very cool. If we swipe to the left and we don't see the card anymore, not only we're not going to see the nice bouncing effect, and we really don't want it, because we want the animation to, as soon as it's outside the viewport, we want it to finish as fast as possible so we can apply the side effects we want. Exactly like in the Tinder example, where you swipe left or right, as soon as the card is outside the viewport, you want to absolutely immediately execute the side effect. Okay, we swiped right or left. It's only when the card goes back to the viewport you want to have a nice bounce. So for instance, in the Tinder example where you swipe back to the original position, here you want a nice bouncing effect. There are two ways you can do this. Either you use a different config for the spring, depending on where you're springing, if you're springing outside or inside the viewport. And in one case, we're gonna have how is it called? Overdamped, I think, spring config, where there are gonna be little oscillation and the spring config is gonna finish quite early. But in my experience, it's really not good enough. So if we're springing outside the viewport, I'm gonna use a timing function to finish it quick. If not, I'm gonna use a spring function. So here, if we snap to the left, so snap to, sorry, I'm gonna create a condition. So if snap2 is 1, we're gonna use a spring function. If not, we're gonna use a timing function. And so if we use the timing function, we go from whatever is transition to 0. Yes. And if it's a spring function, the transition goes to 1. And the spring function, we use these helper functions from Redash that also does a lot of boilerplate for us. We need to assign a clock for each animation to know when the animation is over. So I'm going to create a clock. Sorry. So when the animation is over, so the clock is not running, we want to apply a side effect, namely if we swiped to the left we want to close the drawer, but we want to only execute this side effect once. And here this state equals end is going to be always true. Clock is not running is going to be always true. So for every frame, the side effect potentially will be executed. This is where we need to add a safeguard. We've done it in a previous Can It Be Done in React Native episode, the thing example. So I'm going to create my safeguard called isDone. And it's is the animation, both the gestures and animation is done. Default value is 0. If we start the gesture, we always set it to 0. So if state equals began, we want to reset this value. There is something else we want to do if the gesture is begins again, is we want to interrupt the animation. So if the animation is running and you interrupt it by swiping on the moving card, you want to nicely interrupt the animation and then have the gesture taking over. Actually, let me show you what it looks like without, and then we can implement it. So if the clock is not running, we want isDone to be set to 1, so we don't execute this side effect once, more than once, and I can add it here, and not done. So if the state is end and not is done. So this makes sure that once this is executed, this block won't be executed again. And my side effect is we set open to 1 if snap2 is 0. So we set open, I think, to the value of snap2. So meaning 0 if we are closing. And so here I'm not making the gestures interruptible, so you should see a big difference, I think. So here I move the card around, but you see like it's flickering a bit because I'm interrupting the gesture while it's moving. Let's see if I can close it. I can close it, I can open it. It works well. I mean, you even see the clamp working nicely, but you see like, do you see that it's not very smooth? So it's because we don't make it interruptible, and we can do that by stopping the clock when the gesture begins, in case it's running. Let's have a look. Okay, it's opening, nice bouncing effect. And now, I mean, you don't see my finger, but it's, you know, I'm interrupting the gesture every time. And it's nicely interruptible, super smooth. And I can swipe, and it's closing. It's cool, no? Here is an example that looks great, feels great, and is using very common patterns between React Native gesture handler and reanimated. So first of all, we have the transition that we attach to an animation value or a React state. And then we have the interactions between gesture handler and reanimated, where we have a safeguard value that prevents us from executing the side effects when the gesture plus animation is over, and we want to execute the side effect only once. We use state.end to know when the gesture is over. We use the clock of the animation to know when the animation is over. And when starting the gesture, again, we make sure to stop the clock, stop the animation, in case we are interrupting with our gestures a running animation. I hope you guys enjoyed this example. I'm looking forward to talk to you soon. And in the meantime, happy hacking.